Hi, everybody. This is Brian Mahoney with OTT Executive Podcast. We're continuing in our chats with leaders in the industry, learning from them and also learning a little bit about them. Today, we're joined by Marc Zand, who's the president of Zand Media Advisors and former executive with Ion Media Networks. Marc, welcome today.
Hey, Brian. How are you? Good to see you.
Doing great. So, Marc, just to start, tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and how you got to where you are now.
Great. Well, I've been really enjoying listening to your podcast. I think it's just interesting to talk to industry leaders about their view of the world and how we sort of navigate this ever-changing environment. I just completed about an 18-year run at Ion Media Networks, where I oversaw programming, business affairs, and digital media. We were fortunate to, grow our business and our network. When I started, we were around the 50th or so network. By the time I exited, we were in the top 5, top 10 on a recurring basis. We tripled our ratings. We acquired such iconic shows as Criminal Minds and Blue Bloods, all the Law and Order franchises, all the NCIS franchises. And my role and responsibility was to find and select and source and negotiate those deals. That ended most recently with a sale to Scripps, EW Scripps, in 2021.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. It was a great result, and it was really good for the refounders of the company. And now since then, I've been doing some advisory work. I started a consulting firm working with content owners, streaming platforms, technology companies that work adjacent to the content and media space, and helping them develop strategies and monetization ideas to grow and build their content. I've also been teaching at University of Miami School of Law for the last 3 years, and prior to that at University of Pennsylvania School of Law, teaching a sort of introduction to television business affairs, TV production, sort of a business-oriented coursework at the law school. So having a lot of fun, had a great run at Ion, really enjoyed it. We had a real sort of contrarian approach to the business. A lot of people declared broadcast dead, and everyone was pivoting to cable at the time. And then lo and behold, look where the world is now. So I think the lessons learned that I'm interested to talk to you about on this podcast is sort of keeping your eyes wide open and having a good peripheral vision of media space and knowing how to see and pivot because it's an area that's always changing.
So, Marc, you had a very long run at Ion. We're going to spend a chunk of our time talking about that. So maybe you could just start and define what is a multi-channel diginet, define the business model a little bit, and then we can kind of get into the unique aspects of the technology, distribution, and licensing and things like that.
Right. So multicast networks, they're also known as D2, D3, diginets. And what basically happened was, and this is might be a little bit weird for some of your listeners, but there was a period of time when all the broadcast spectrum that station groups had was all analog. And there was a digital sort of transformation where everyone had to turn off the analog signal by a certain date. This is probably 10, 15 years ago. And by doing that, it freed up all this additional spectrum space. And because the broadcasters were licensed by the FCC, they had to either give that spectrum back to the government for them to use for other beneficial uses, or they had to demonstrate that they were going to actually do something beneficial and use the spectrum. So lo and behold, people came up with the idea, let's launch more channels. Because HD alone and going digital was not going to use up the entire spectrum. So we actually, again, being an independent broadcaster and not being part of a big conglomerate, we had to sort of always be creative in how to monetize our business because we were an advertiser-based business. We didn't have a subscriber fee, and we had to get creative. So we launched 2 multicast channels probably in 2006, right after that digital transformation. Mm-hmm. One was a kids channel called Cubo, and one was called Ion Life, which was health and wellness and lifestyle programming. So what quickly happened was the station groups realized that they were sitting on some valuable real estate, and they weren't necessarily adept at creating those channels, but people were creating these channels and coming to them and be willing to either split the inventory and do a barter deal on those channels or pay for carriage. And since that time, that whole industry has emerged, and it's hundreds of $1 billion business now with networks like MeTV and Bounce and Comet. Sinclair's had a really good run with it. Mm-hmm. Weigel's had a really good run with it. Tribune to some extent. So there was this sort of cottage industry that just came out of nowhere. And it was just, necessity is the mother of invention. And we were sort of early in the space, but at the end of the day, most of the viewership came from over the air, and unless you could get cable retransmission, it was hard to really scale the business. So some of the bigger station groups, like a Sinclair or a Tribune, that had retransmission deals with the cable companies could say, well, if you want to do a retransmission deal with Sinclair for Fox or Tribune for CBS, you had to take our multicast channels as well. So they would sort of shove those down the cable operators' throats and say, you take our D1 plus a D2 and a D3. At ION, we didn't have that leverage, so our multicast channels did not grow as much. But the flip side to that is we started pivoting very quickly to the OTT space, to the streaming space, because we had this content, we had this rights, and we needed to figure out how to monetize it. So there was this sort of parallel play between multicast and now ultimately what they're calling FAST, free advertiser supported TV.
Okay, so let me pause you there. So that there's a lot there to unpack. So take me back to the early days, first of all. So you're launching this new multicast network, right? And you're starting from scratch, right? So you're trying to figure out right now we have this cornucopia content. Back in the day, you were like, wow, what are we going to put on this channel, right? Like, how did you figure that out?
Well, I think what a lot of people did in the early days were you tried to program these channels as inexpensively as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So there was two sort of prevailing criteria. One was, if you notice with MeTV, it was like everyone called it classic TV. It was basically Hogan's Heroes and Andy Griffith. It was old TV shows that were inexpensive, that were library product, that was sitting on the shelves of the studios that you can get inexpensively.
Right.
Well, as these multicast channels grew, the studios wised up and they started increasing the prices, and there was sort of a rationalization. The other thing was that we did was we worked very closely with the FCC, and the FCC said, well, we'll allow you to keep your license for this additional spectrum, but you need to do channels that serve a public interest. And we'll even help you potentially get cable carriage and push your over-the-air signal through to the cable operators. So we did kids, we did a, sort of pro-social, not Nickelodeon, SpongeBob kids, but stuff that taught responsibility and how to be a good citizen. And that's sort of was the Cubo brand. And then the other one was health and wellness, which is also important. We worked pretty closely with some of the FCC committees, but in the end, it became very political. We're not even the big NCTA cable lobby was much stronger than our little multicast channels.
Yeah.
So then you started seeing African American underserved audience channels like Bounce, classic TV channels like MeTV, all the old MGM library, and which became This TV. So again, people just program it on a very inexpensive basis, and it's largely still to this day the content that's on multicast. It's not the premier highest quality, but I think the broadcasters see it as a low-cost way to monetize their spectrum.
Yeah, and it's a strange and fantastic beast, and it's got many different facets that I think are interesting and are taking us, connecting the past with the future. So let me give a couple examples. We built a backyard with a pool and a pool house, and we put a TV back there, and we put a digital antenna up there. And it was literally the first time I was seeing some of these channels, like MeTV and ION. We have Comcast, so we already had that as a channel, and my family are big Blue Bloods fans, so we were already familiar with that. And so it opened up this whole new possibility. And now with next gen TV, ATSC 3.0, over the air's got new legs. And in terms of content discovery, it's sort of the old style of you could just flip a channel and suddenly discover content that you didn't know about, which in some ways is very refreshing these days when we've got overwhelming options, and we still spend an hour trying to find the perfect title to watch on Netflix, kind of like we did when we're walking to the Blockbuster store, right? So now you have this lean back experience. Now, before we get to the fast channels and the parallels there, tell me about that and how that helped with your strategy and grow ION Media Network.
Well, I think one thing that we didn't touch on is, everyone likes to have content choice, and there's a difference between the lean forward, I'm going to choose my show on Netflix or Hulu, versus the lean back linear experience. We believed in a lean back linear experience. There's something they call the paradox of choice. Once you go on Netflix and Amazon, within 30 seconds, you're like, I'll just watch the same old show, I'll just watch Friends. And there was the same sort of concept in ION, is you go to all your different outlets. At the end of the day, I'll put Law and Order on. I know that makes it's comfort, it's easy. But the piece that we didn't touch on, Brian, with the multicast channels, with over the air, is it's free.
Good point.
So when you have that TV in your backyard, no cable subscription is necessary. When you're in the gym or on a treadmill, you're watching an over the air signal on your TV in your gym. It's free. And what we found, interestingly enough, is even though the over the air audience to some extent is sort of stabilized, maybe growing slightly because of the cord cutting, it's a highly consumable product. So 10% of our distribution was pure over the air, no cable redistribution, just plug the antenna into the wall. But it was over 30% of our ratings.
Wow.
So we had this distinct advantage over our competitors, USA and TNT, A&E, because they were cable only. People saw us as a cable network, but we had all this over-indexing of broadcast of people who liked free TV and couldn't afford cable. So that was really the birthing of Multicast, was it being free.
Yeah, and so now we kind of tie it to the present and the future with FAST, and we've had this massive just explosion of new FAST channels over the last couple of years, especially, and it's kind of interesting because it takes advantage of one of the benefits of OTT, in that you can have even a very narrow audience and it can get global reach, pretty quickly. And in terms of programming, you can really kind of super serve particular demographics, or more general. It's really opens up a whole world of possibilities because you're relying on advertising, right? And so let's talk about FAST a little bit, and then I want to get into licensing and how you actually program and fill your pipeline of content.
This is a fascinating industry, and the studios, their job is to monetize their content. And for years, it was always just sell our content and license it to, we have original content on our platforms, our networks, and then we license it to the highest bidder. Well, all of a sudden you have disruptors out there like a Netflix, like Amazon, like Apple, that just turn the industry on its head. And all of a sudden now these platforms are saying, well, we can't just build up these competitors because now all the original content is going to these streaming platforms. We have to build out our own platform. So if you're a sales executive at Peacock or at CBS with Pluto or NBC with Peacock, you're like, well, now I have to build my own platform. I got to try to keep the best content on my platform, and at the same time monetize the content and sell it. So you have this sort of constant swirling of analysis as to how to build value. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, Netflix said they would never do advertising. All of a sudden, Netflix is going to do advertising. And I think it just shows that it's always changing the manner in which people will consume content. And while everyone loved the idea of picking what they wanted to watch, people also like the ability to just have it served and curated for them. So what I find interesting about FAST is there's FAST channels that may be a broad category of general entertainment, but some of the FAST channels that do the best are a single series channel. It may be a Blue Bloods channel on Pluto that people love because I don't have to go pick the episode of Blue Bloods on Netflix or Hulu. I just turn it on and it's on for me. And so the technology sort of will ultimately gear towards what the consumers ask for in a frictionless world, but it takes time. And the studios try to figure it out, and they don't know. No one really knows what the future is. So I think, like I said, you got to have really good peripheral vision to sort of see where the trends are and how to monetize your content. And that's sort of where I've been leaning into, and that's what attracted me to FAST. I kind of saw it as an adjacency to what we did with Multicast, which is it's a lean back experience. It's someone curating and helping you find what you want to watch, and it's advertiser supported. So the entry point is not as high as when you have to go in at a subscription level.
It seems to me, Marc, that there's this tension between exclusivity of the content and wide distribution and sort of gaining eyeballs. Let's talk about that a little bit, because in some cases you have a strategy where, hey, we're going to lock up original content, we're going to license, no one else gets access to it. You got to go to our tile on whatever platform, connected TV or whatever, to get that content. And you're going to draw eyeballs there because they can't get anywhere else. And then there's the strategy of, we don't really care. Someone's worked hard to build an audience through whatever viewer acquisition, marketing they've done, branding they've done. We'll share that with them because they're going to bring in eyeballs that we might not have gotten through some other means. Is there a right strategy there, or do you see that kind of working its way out over time?
No, I mean, it's very interesting, and there's a lot of different sort of scenarios there, right? So, my philosophy was, there was always sort of well, I can watch Criminal Minds on 5 different channels and 3 different streaming platforms. That was always sort of like what the bankers would say to us when we were trying to do valuations and trying to position the company to be sold. But our thought was there's over 100 million TV households. And if you got 1 million TV households watching your network on that particular night, you were in the top 10. So it didn't matter. The exclusivity to us was not as important as creating an environment that people would go to. But, the flip side of that is the streamers, when they do their original content, they're saying, hey, look, if I'm going to do, Squid Game, the only place you can watch Squid Game is Netflix, period, ever, forever and ever and ever. And HBO had that philosophy too. But then they started selling their content on other platforms and it didn't work. They sold Entourage, they sold Sopranos, it didn't work. So now they took it back and said the only place you can watch this content is, so in that respect, I think with subscription, you do want to have a level of exclusivity, but these are expensive productions. So, the CFO or the CEO in the ivory tower is saying, where's my money? We're not making any money on this. Subscription alone is not going to do it, particularly when subscriptions get to a mature level. So now you see that Warner Discovery is now outselling their HBO content because they need to sort of open it up. I believe that Amazon and Netflix and Hulu will start selling their original content at some point. Look, Amazon and Apple are different animals because they're, that they're countries, they're nations. But the other stream is in order to really be able to rationalize their, so Peacock might sell Poker Face, a second window of that, to a cable network, not owned by NBC because they need to monetize their content. And that was one of the things we did at Ion in the days of the cable originals. No one was buying Closer or Burn Notice of these cable originals because USA didn't want to sell the TNT and TNT didn't want to sell the FX. And we came in there and we bought all these cable originals. So we created a new window. So I think as a content executive, someone that's trying to create channels, you got to look for the inefficiencies in the marketplace. And that's kind of...
And that's what you did. And so I think you kind of hit on it. The potential answer here is, we have a new form of content windowing where even if you invest, heavy in some, I think of, Rings of Power or something like that, that eventually your ability to monetize that sort of tapers off and it can find new life and new revenue streams through these other distribution paths.
Look, I mean, the big studios got punished last year because they didn't meet their projections or if they're not on the track to meet their projections to grow their subscribers. And they said, well, wait a minute, that's why we are producing all this expensive content. And it's like, well, now we also need to think about how to monetize this expensive content. So it's a pendulum. There's a growth pendulum and there's a value profitability pendulum. And that's the inherent tension. And I think as an executive looking to build fast channels, right? So now fast is sort of the flavor of the month right now, but it's basic cable. It's just, or it's over the air broadcast. It's just another way of free advertiser supported TV distribution and just through a new technology. And maybe there's some different ideas where you can do single series, you could do a surfing channel, a bull riding channel, but there's a lot of different themes. But in the end, it's general entertainment that's advertiser supported. And it really becomes incumbent upon the studios is, do they want to deal? Do they want to sell these rights?
Well, I think you're hitting on something. I would also add that in addition to the business model itself, it's a familiar, comfortable, lean back experience. Just, flip on the channel and you're going to get nice curated, old episodes of Blue Blood or whatever it is. And that there's a comfort in that, right? There's no effort. And that sort of drives in new eyeballs a little bit. So you are also talking about the licensing of the content and how that business model may be changing over time. I think, is there a difference between the fast channels that are independent, really where they're licensing, not the scraps, but they're taking advantage of those opportunities, as you mentioned, and they might have limited windows where they have rights to that content. That carpet might be pulled out from under their feet versus those fast channels created by, the heavyweights that, they're just curating to particular audiences, but there's no concern they're going to lose that content at some point.
Well, I think, what drove me back into getting involved and launching my consulting practice was it's just so interesting. And I don't think anyone really knows. And it's like every day you learn something and something's different. I think that a lot of traditional channels were not able to get fast distribution because they didn't own the rights. They had traditional cable and broadcast rights. They didn't have over-the-air streaming rights, or maybe they had subscription video on demand rights or AVOD rights for, say, Big Bang Theory on TBS, but they didn't have the rights to stream Big Bang Theory across a TBS fast channel. So you see an A&E that has the History Channel, but then they have a History Vault that's a fast channel, and it's different content. And that's not necessarily the best. They may say it's better content, it's great content, but the truth of the matter is, from an efficiency standpoint, from a buying standpoint, you'd like to have a clean stream across all of your content. So I think, look, the studios are going to get involved in fast. They are going to do fast channels, but the bus has left the station. There's over 300 channels on Samsung and LG and all of these platforms. Like Pluto it's growing every day, the number of channels. There'll also be a saturation as well. So how do they curate the channels? The challenge with AVOD is you have to pick and choose and find your content. With fast, again, it makes it easier. So I think that the other point I would make about fast is now with programmatic ad serving and with all the metadata tagging, for lower cost content, not the premier content, you could do rev shares. So you can acquire content and build a channel without necessarily putting up those high license fees and say, look, we're going to make a kids channel. If people watch your channel, you're going to get 50% of the revenue.
Right.
Or watch your content. They don't watch your content, so not all content's created equal, but at least you can. Now it's complicated and the reporting will get complicated, but it's all technology and there will be people that know how to report and serve that. So I think from a content acquisition standpoint, traditional licensing may also morph into sort of a rev share basis.
Yeah, and I think that's why the fast channels are taken off so fast, because until we got to this point, it seemed like a daunting task to figure out, if you're a content owner, how to enter those negotiations to license your content in different windows, different distribution all over the place. But if you think of just the advertising based model and revenue share, it's very trackable. It's probably a thinner contract, right? Like, hey, let's do this. Works out great. You're going to get, a share of the revenues.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, it's also knowing how to thread the needle a little bit. So if Viacom pays, gazillions of dollars for The Office, they're going to want that on all their cable networks. They're going to want it on Pluto. They're going to want it on all their different outlets that they own. But NBC, who sells it, may say, hey, look, we want to do fast channels with The Office on Peacock. So there's a tension there between I'm paying a lot of license fees, I need exclusivity, versus people trying to build their own platform. And what we were able to do at ION was we were an independent broadcaster, so we sort of knew our place. We said, hey, when I bought Hawaii Five-0 and NCIS from CBS, it's like, you guys want to do fast channels on Pluto? Great. But you can do that. And that sort of allowed the negotiation to move forward, that I could acquire this content and get fast rights. But I didn't get fast rights to the shows. I got fast rights to ION. And we were one of the first companies that got fast rights. And if you look at Samsung, you look at these platforms, you don't see a lot of the bigger brands on there just yet because they haven't cleared the rights. But ION,
and it's more competitive. I mean, you had a more of a non-threatening value proposition when you were entering in those discussions, those negotiations.
Those are always the best ways to negotiate.
Always the best way. Well, listen, we could talk forever about this. I just find it fascinating. I mean, a lot of folks will find it daunting and confusing and everything else, but I think this is part of the industry growing up. We're seeing consolidations, we're seeing spinoffs, we're seeing layoffs, we're seeing a lot of change happening right now. The adults are in charge. All of these businesses need to make money. At the end of the day, they need to, understand who their audience is and serve them and give them great content and a great experience. And however they do it, they need to monetize it. And so I think that's all, the era of sort of the Wild West, these land grabs is starting to come to a close. And, still a lot more fast channels coming for sure. But I think we're seeing a healthy growing up in the industry. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, no, I think, look, Brian, I enjoy your podcast very much. I listen to them. I think you're very astute and really on top of these issues. I think that it's a pendulum. I think anyone that thinks they know exactly where it's going, it doesn't know. And I think, everyone was very focused on an on-demand viewing experience and choosing what to watch. And then lo and behold, people are like, well, you know what? I like to have the alternative. Maybe it's also a lower cost alternative to watch an ad, but also to have it curated and served up to me. So it just changes. I just think the next phase is going to go back to just like the cable package ballooned and became a $200 a month package. Multiple subscriptions are also ballooning, and people aren't watching multiple subscriptions. And I think when Netflix is saying, hey, we're going to crack down on password sharing, that's an indication to the market that things aren't well at Netflix, in my opinion, that people are going to shift how they watch, because all of a sudden they're going to question, do I really need to spend that $15? Now my subscription package is over $100. Hey, I got all these free channels on my Samsung or LG TV set. I have an over-the-air antenna. I get all the networks. I can pick a couple different ones. It's just interesting.
And I think that's an example, the password sharing with Netflix. I mean, just last week, they famously sort of started to backpedal a little bit, like, oh, nothing to see here. Please don't cancel us. We're just trying that out in Chile or somewhere. And I guess that is a little scary, because you'd expect the big players to have a very well thought through strategy and be executing on it at this point, pretty far down the path of OTT and streaming. But I think the reality is, even though the industry is maturing, we're still sort of in experimentation mode. Who knows what's going to happen 3 years from now?
Exactly. And then you swing it around to saying, okay, we can talk and spin this around and do this intellectual discourse. At the end of the day, if there's a good show on a platform, that's the game changer, right? If there's the White Lotus, game changer, right? So that's really ultimately, it becomes a very simple proposition in a very complex environment at the same time.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with other leaders in the industry too. Like, at the end of the day, tell a good story, have a good show. If you do that well, people are going to come. The business stuff, the business model, viewer acquisition, that will figure itself out. We got experts in charge of those things, but you can't forget about having compelling content.
I agree. And then the flip side, sort of my ION DNA is, attention to margin, right? Going into something with being mindful of your cost structure and being mindful of what your revenue streams are. And I think when everyone's in that growth arms race, you lose sight of that sometimes. And then Wall Street ultimately will punish you when you least expect it. So look, it's all exciting. I mean, that's what makes this whole thing kind of fun for me. And talking to you, it's interesting.
It is fun. You seem like you're having a lot of fun right now. Any hints about the future for Marc Zand and, things you might be considering down the road? I don't know.
Well, I mean, one of the things I am been thinking about is, once you start advising all these different companies about how to monetize their content, how to create and launch fast channels, you say to yourself, well, look, I'm not part of a big bureaucratic corporation anymore where I'm building value for shareholders. Maybe I'll do it myself. Maybe I'll launch some fast channels. I've been speaking to some pretty interesting brands out there and some interesting content players where I would take more of a principal position and launch some fast channels. It comes down to energy, how much you want to work.
How much energy? Hey, I'll work with you on those fast channels. I got some ideas too.
Okay. So, there's the idea, and then there's like, oh, this is actually a lot of work. So, but it's an interesting time. I think there are a lot of opportunities. I've been teaching at and I really enjoy working with young people. And that's been really fun for me. And one of my projects is involved with youth baseball, very high level youth baseball. So working with, younger people, you feed off of that, their youth and their age. And that stuff I do like.
Yeah, I agree. And I have kids in college and high school. And actually one of my next podcasts is going to be high school age trenders and kind of their viewing habits and stuff. We're almost out of time here, Marc, but I do want to end, we like to personalize some of the leaders in the industry. Is there something you can tell us about yourself, a hobby, an interest that might be interesting to our audience?
Well, it's funny. After I left ION, I started the typical, golf and whatever, boating and whatnot. And my hobby really became this industry. I really enjoy it. It's just very stimulating. But I'll tell you one story. When I got out of law school, I worked for a big law firm and really didn't want to do that and was not particularly good at it. And, gigantic law firm, millions of hours. I really wanted to work in entertainment. I ended up taking a job with a celebrity divorce lawyer, a very famous celebrity divorce lawyer in New York. I don't know if anyone's going to remember. His name's Raul Felder, but he was like a page 6, tabloid guy with a lot of celebrities. So the way I saw an opportunity to get into the entertainment industry was I represent all these celebrities or people going after celebrities in their divorces or paternity cases. And I would meet people and I would get a job in the entertainment industry. And so I did paternity cases against Mike Tyson, LL Cool J, Steven Tyler. I mean, I remember I was with Liv Tyler when she was 13 years old, getting blood tests with Steven Tyler in a little
Oh my
lab in New
goodness.
York. So it was pretty wild. I was in my early 20s. And, lo and behold, I did a divorce for a William Morris agent, and we became very close. And he introduced me to someone at HBO that introduced me to someone at Viacom, and I got a business affairs job. And that was how I got my start. So I always tell my students at UM, because, getting into the entertainment industry, particularly in law, it's a very small group, and you got to sort of be creative. And I think that's been my theme with everything is you have to approach business in all these ways with a creative bent and a creative approach. And that's my little kind of interesting story.
I love it. What a great story. That's awesome. You probably made some enemies too with those paternity suits too. So
yeah, well, I did Don King and Don King's son, and I do remember a few threats that were thrown at me during those hearings. So yeah, I was I made sure I stayed close to the bailiff.
Well, you did great. Fantastic following your career. Let's stay in touch.
Definitely, sure.
Really appreciate your insights here. We don't have all the answers. We'll see together how this industry evolves, but I think it's growing in some healthy ways, some growing pains for sure. But yeah, I'm equally excited to see what the future holds.
Awesome, Brian. Let's definitely stay in touch. I really enjoy this.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Joined today by Marc Zand from Zand Media Advisors, former executive with Ion Media Works. This is Brian Mahoney with OTT Executive Podcast, signing off, everybody. Thanks, Marc.
Take care. Thank you.